Namaskar and welcome to this exciting new episode of Sattology Debunking Mythology. Sat means truth, Logos means study or science, Sattology means a science of truth or study of truth. Opposite of that is mythology, which means science of fake lie imagination or study of fake lie imagination. So don't use mythology word on Ramayana and Mahabharata. I've written 3 books on them. I proved it conclusively. And I think probably it will go into many other. In India, it's coming as a global footprint of Ramayana from Kapoth publications. So do get it if you get a chance. And also today I have a very special guest, and we are going to talk all about the temples and the temple economies, and also how it is important for us, or why. Also, I'm going to ask. It's going to be a very light conversation. So without delay, let us welcome Sahana Singh from Houston, USA.
Namaste. Namaste to everyone. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Very welcome, Sahana Singh ji. So if you can show your book. So what inspired you to write this book before we get on to the topic?
Yeah, can you see the book? This is
Bring
the...
it closer to the camera so that we can all see it.
Okay.
Revisiting the Educational Heritage of India. Wonderful title.
That's right. So this is all about universities in ancient times, the Guru Shishya Parampara, and the ecosystem of learning that we had, and the respect given to scholars, and how knowledge creation was the most important thing. How Vidya was the most important goal of almost everybody. Yes. So what inspired me to write this book is actually coming to America itself. So I was always interested in history. I was keeping in touch with what is being written by Dr. David Frawley, Dr. Subhash Kak. Dr. N.S. Rajaram was the first one who introduced me to this topic. But then I thought that since I'm an engineer, I have studied engineering, so I should stick to my topic. And at that time, actually, I was working for a water magazine. I became the editor of a magazine called Asian Water, which was the leading magazine on water and wastewater for the Asian region. So that's what I was focused on. But when we moved to the US, so that's the time when my daughter joined high school, and she took up history, world history. And when she brought home her book, I was very eager to start learning along with her. And then I opened the chapter which had something to say about India. And that's where I found that it was so distorted. There was just very little about India. And the only thing they had to say about India was the low status of women, sati, poverty, all these kinds of things, caste system. So there was no mention of yoga, nyaya, vyakarana, all the great things that India has given to the world. So that's when I started writing whatever I knew about history, started reading more. And that's how I got into this whole quest of, seeking out our past, because it was so inspiring. And that's how one thing led to the other. The more I learned, the more I wanted to write. I wrote articles which got published and a lot of appreciation. And then eventually that turned into a book.
Very good. Because I think whenever anyone reads Ziegler, because that's what they teach in history. Ziegler has written all the books. I wrote an article on that in which they write over there that Krishna introduced caste system in the Hindu society. And they quote Bhagavad Gita on that. Chaturvarnyam maya srishtam. And so this is how blasphemous the content of American textbooks is. Anyone who reads it, and I've written a whole article on Sattology.com, you can check it out with exact references and screenshots. And with that, you are absolutely right. Atrocious. 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. All these history books are atrocious, especially on Hindus. It's a religion primarily playing a role. Now, coming to your book again. Now, when we hear that during Macaulay's time, before the British education was enforced in India, and even during the Mughal period, 3 things were free in India. One is education, second was medicine, and the third was food. These 3 things were free. And the medicines were also free. I mean, healthcare was free. And the temples used to be a major center where all these 3 things were present at the same time along with the market. If anyone wants to go shopping, even today it is continuing. Some of the best shops are around the temples even today. So why this was changed, and in US education is free until the 12th grade, is funded by the state, even though the education may be questioned. What kind of education is that? Creating more burger fryers in McDonald's. So the what is your book tells us the status of education pre-colonial times, especially the European colonial times, and also the Mughal
Yes.
colonial time, if you have covered it.
I've actually divided the book into two parts, or rather three parts. The first part is all during the ancient times, what it was like when it was the absolutely one, or you can near ideal educational ecosystem that we had in ancient times. I've described all that, and then the benefits of that. That's how we produced so much knowledge that there was a knowledge revolution, and all this knowledge traveled westwards, eastwards. They went in every direction, students coming from all over the world to study in our universities. So that was the period of knowledge generation. And then came this period when we were invaded and our universities were destroyed by the Islamists. So we had Muhammad bin Bakhtiar Khilji coming in, destroying Nalanda, Vikramshila, all these universities. And then we had the scholars fleeing from all these places which were ruled by the Islamists. How they went to the south, they went to Kashmir as well. They fled to Tibet and all these places where they felt more safe. But eventually the Islamic pressure got even to those places, and knowledge was destroyed from there as well. So that system which you described, where knowledge was free and you could not, the gurus taught for the love of teaching and because it was their dharma, that thing started getting corrupted. But then, though the higher education institutions were destroyed during the Islamic rule, and then the Islamic learning itself was put in place. So we had maktabs and madrasas which were teaching Islam, tenets of Islam, rather than the earlier system that we had, where we had debates, where we talked about everything, science, maths, everything on spirituality. All these things were being discussed. So that atmosphere started going away. And there was fear, because now survival was the most important thing. We had scholars carrying their manuscripts and fleeing to safety, because if the manuscripts fell in the hands of the invaders, they're going to be burned, they're going to be thrown in the river, all these things. So they were protecting whatever knowledge they had. That was the time, and survival and protecting whatever you considered valuable. That was the focus. And then came the colonial times, where there was not only this kind of control over every aspect of our lives, but our whole thinking was changed. The mindset was changed, so that we started feeling inferior to the colonizers. We were made to feel that we were very primitive, and so modern science, everything is coming to us from the West. So that is what my book talks about, the destruction. It tells you how the Indian knowledge systems got destroyed and became a pale shadow of their former selves. And then there's a final part where I talk about how can we bring it back? What can we do to bring back certain aspects of our educational system which would be relevant even today, which are very powerful tools, which are very inspiring, and we can bring them back today in our modern education system. So that's what it's about.
No, coming back to the specific examples, like you mentioned some examples, can you quote one or two examples from your book which talks about how the destruction was carried out, like which can really, which we don't know generally, because the Wikipedia doesn't tell us all the things. Wikipedia has a lot of information which is highly curated. It's curated in the sense that more anglicized Islamic narrative is written in Wikipedia on Hindus, kind of disparaging to say a least. So what is your book tell something which is not available in the social media?
Okay, so actually nowadays a lot of it is available if you look for it. So I have talked about the destruction of temples, because temples were centers of learning. So we think that the way it's projected is that temples were attacked because they had wealth. They had so much wealth that was given by devotees, But actually, they were not just centers of wealth, but also knowledge, because temple universities were there, and temples often had annexes where debates used to be held, where discourses were held. So wherever you hear of temple destruction, that is where knowledge has been destroyed as well. And scholars have probably fled from all those examples. Wherever all those examples of temple destruction that we have, you can safely assume that that is where the destruction of knowledge has taken place as well. And I've talked about Kashmir. Kashmir, how knowledge was destroyed there. So that is one example, because Kashmir was a place it was called Sharda Peeth, the university there, and that was a place where scholars went from different parts of India to refer to the manuscripts in Sharda Peeth. So, and the place itself was called Sharda Desh. Now, Sharda being Saraswati, you can imagine what a center of learning it was, knowledge production, knowledge creation. So a place associated with universities, knowledge, that place, when it was destroyed, how much of knowledge was destroyed, that is there in my book. So when the Islamic rule spread and got completely established in Kashmir, so then the rulers used to get hold of all the manuscripts, burn them, throw them in the rivers. That is something probably not many people know. And then there is also an example I have given of the invasion of Sri Rangan temple, when you have so many, the whole army of Ulugh Khan coming and attacking. And then there is the story of Vedanta Deshika, who carries the manuscripts of his guru. He carries it to safety because his guru, everybody knows that the invasion is imminent, and they are protecting what is very valuable, and Vedanta Desika is protecting those manuscripts, and he carries them away to safety. So those are the scenes where some manuscripts were saved, but so many others were destroyed. And then there also is the example of scholars who would throw the manuscripts in the river because they didn't want them to be defiled. Because if these manuscripts, holy books, sacred books with knowledge, as well as lot of truths, lot of important truths about the Atman, sacred knowledge, basically, if it falls in the hands of the invaders, it's going to be defiled. They are going to step over it. They're going to burn it. So before that happened, a lot of scholars used to throw these manuscripts in the river, in the nearest river. So that was something very scarring, and I wanted to mention that in the book. It's there. There's a whole chapter on how knowledge was destroyed.
You're absolutely right, because people generally belittle things and say that it was purely for wealth. And it was not just for wealth, because it is very clear in the report published by Macaulay in the British Parliament that unless we destroy their education, their sense of superiority over us will not go away. Because
so when we talk about Macaulay, I didn't come to Macaulay. So I was speaking about the Islamic period when they physically destroyed. But yes, came the colonial period, and they actually destroyed us mentally.
That's right.
They did not have burned books, but they just made us feel so inferior and disconnected that we didn't want to read those books, and we didn't have the language to read those books.
That's right. And also, even I call the Mughal period as a colonial period, because it was an invasion without the choice of the natives. Unfortunately, Hindus were very welcoming, and some parts of Hindu community also welcomed them. And some parts of Hindu community realized that these are not guests, they are not atithi, they are imposed upon us. So now when we talk about the destruction of temples, beginning from Afghanistan, because the Afghanistan people do not know, Kabul was a major Hindu hub where more than 9,000 temples have been, the reports say 5,000, but generally the reports, when they say in Wikipedia, you have to multiply by 1.5 times, or one time at least, or 0.5 times. So you have to make it 1.5. So I say 9,000 temples, Hindu temples, and systematically destroyed through aggression, through bribes, sending the Hindu traders to Syria to get beautiful women, and then luring them. Then you can have 4 marriages, 3 marriages, and all kinds of these kind of lures were done. So do you capture all those things also in your book? Because and what can you tell the viewers about it? How the colonization from Islam and then later on colonization by Europe were two different things completely.
Yes, I have captured that in my book, but all in relation to learning and knowledge, knowledge destruction. So yes, I've talked about how in the Muslim period, when slaves were, when women were not safe. So when we talk about women's education, why were women in a lower position? Or today, even today, you find the remnants of that. Because in ancient times, we see that we had women scholars producing works, and even in the Rig Veda, we mention so many women scholars, the Rishikas that we talk about. And then we find that the position of women was so much degraded in later times. So, in that connection, I have spoken about how the system of female slavery got so intense during the Islamic period that these women, even women from royal families, they were all being turned into slaves, and they were being transported to the slave markets, and then whoever would buy them. So that's how, in fact, if you look at the stories of all the rulers, the Mughal rulers, so many of their concubines, they were slaves who were actually captured. Women captured during various wars. So in such a situation, how do you expect women to be highly educated and producing works? They were actually, in spite of all these things happening, there were a number of women who were producing important works of poetry and so on. Of course, those were places where maybe they were further away from the Islamic pressure, those kind of places. Women were still doing that. But yes, the whole ecosystem where men, women, children, everybody is into Vidya, that was gone. And I've described that in my book. I have described the degradation of education and how the women's status got lowered because of that also.
So when we talk about the education for women, which was forbidden in both, I mean, the Europeans got their enlightenment in 16th century, and before that, you can consider them as savages according to their own history, own version. And they came to India after the papal bull. Now, all these things, I have also written books on that. So 11 books I published. So uh, so all these things were happening simultaneously: the European Enlightenment and European colonization. And the Enlightenment was that they were the God's gift to the Mother Earth, and they have the right or suzerainty over everybody else. So they came to India and South America to civilize them. And very little people know that when the American frontier wars were going on towards the West, at that time, the India's first freedom movement happened in 1857. 1854, Thomas Jefferson started moving west through Oklahoma. And at that time, the same thing was happening. And 1846 was the Mexican-American War from relieving the California. So the American conquest, Indian conquest, South American conquest were all simultaneously going on, all three areas. So the only place where they encountered the educated people was India. Nowhere else. Nowhere else they had the thing. So now, how did the education play an important role in the Indian intellectual challenge to the European colonialists as well as Islamic? Because both did not have any intellectualism.
Yeah. So I find this is a very interesting question, because the only way they could actually govern us was by changing our education system, because they did not encounter this level of education in any of those places that you mentioned. So here, in order to control such a mass swath of population, and that too, they're all literate, because you see, if we read Dharampal's books, we know that literacy was very high all over India. There was a pathshala in every village. That's what it is said. And so the children used to go to school. They would all know the alphabets. They would know how to read. They would know how to do math. And apart from that, of course, there were the great scholars who were learned. And so when the British wanted to rule over India, they had to carry out a survey of the education systems all over India in order to see how much of education is there. Because now they know that in order to control us, they have to change the education system. There's no other way you can control. So that's how this whole Macaulay Minute and everything that came about is actually a part of a process which took place over a long time, where they realized that they need to change our education system. And in fact, you find them openly talking about it. If I have quoted Charles Trevelyan, who is saying that unless you educate them, you can't control them, because if they keep kind of reading their books in Sanskrit, then they are going to always be, very respectful towards their past, although their history, and they would always regard us as outsiders, as mlechas. They would not respect us. So we have to stop them from reading all those texts, and we have to. So they should be reading in English. If we change to an English medium education system, then they will be reading what the books that we have written in English. So this was a very well thought out strategy. And in fact, you can actually give them credit for that if you look at it from their point of view, how cleverly they realized that they need to change the education system. And in order to do that, they need to do first a survey. So they did a survey in Punjab area, then Madras presidency, then Bengal. So they did a proper survey, educational survey, to see how much intervention they have to do. And that survey that they did is now our source of information, which tells us how educated we were. So even in the schools, in the primary schools, so the Muslims had destroyed the higher education system, but the primary education system was still intact, even though it was in a state of decay. So all over India, the schools were still there, the pathshalas were there. But as the Islamic rule progressed and the European colonizers got a bigger hold over the country, these schools didn't have the funding. The whole ecosystem was gone, where people were doing dana, giving to educational institutions. That whole that practice vanished, because now there was no money. Everybody was being taxed to the maximum, and they had nothing left, so the schools could not be supported. And so that's the time when so anyway, going back to what Dharampal said. So these schools, the primary schools that were there when the educational survey was being carried out, these schools had very good teachers who were very dedicated. And there are some shining examples which have been described by the British themselves. So those are mentioned in my book. In Tamil Nadu, there is this Reverend Bell, who finds out that the schools, they're doing so well and they're teaching so well, even though they don't have so much money, they don't have resources for blackboards and things. And Reverend Bell notices that the older children are teaching the younger children, and they don't, even without blackboards, they use sand. So they use sand tracing to teach alphabets, all these things. So there was this big effort to keep education going, even though there were no resources. There were resources were dwindling. And so that's how after doing the whole survey, the British then introduced the English Education Act. And then they made English the medium of instruction. And that's how all these the people, now the population, realized that in order to get jobs, they need to get an education in English medium. And that's how those schools that had the native languages as the medium of instruction, those schools started dying out. And these English medium schools became the norm. And then it was a status symbol to study in these kind of schools. And then that's how the whole, now that we have English medium schools, the British realized that we can now introduce any stream of thought, the whole framework of looking at society, the whole mindset, everything can be changed. So that's the way it was done by the European colonizers. So and they also, by the way, they could distinguish between the Muslims and the Hindus, that, the Muslims are similarly, when they're reading books in Arabic, then they will not have any kind of connection with us, the Europeans. So we should not let them read everything in Arabic. So they thought about all these things. They mulled it in Parliament, in the British Parliament, and finally imposed English. And via English, they gave all these ideas that we are still carrying today. So when we talk about decolonization, it is those ideas planted from those times.
It was a very colonial strategy.
Yeah.
Replace the local language with the colonizers' language.
Correct.
South America has no traces of the local languages left. They speak Spanish or Portuguese, and some parts English also, like in Chile as well as Belize. And the second was India. And very ironical, we are doing this show in English, but we are teaching the Macaulay Putra, an Indianized version of English, which is we are speaking in their language, but debunking their own bad deeds. Now, coming to the next question, now the language plays a very important role in shaping the mindset, like you said. You and I are speaking in English, but thinking in Hindi or Sanskrit, and that's how we are putting out the English words. The language plays an important role. The second is, and I think probably it's the single way to control everything else, because then you control the thought process. And then, I have seen the if people speak English at home, and then the children are less respectful to the parents if the English is the principal language at home. And if there is any other language, then children have more culture, especially uh, Indian culture. Now, this is how the language plays on the minds of people. So English today, and just give you statistics, out of 4 million schools in India, 63,000 are convent schools. 63,000 are convent schools, which is, if you could look at the population of colonial children, Anglo, whatever you call them, and their population is just 1.5 to 2% in India, but they control more than 10% of the schools in India. And this is how what is going on today. And also there is a very interesting, one poet in India said, English is a skill, but the language is the local, which is Hindi or Brijbhashi or whatever languages people speak. So tell me something more which you have researched, that how language destroyed the Indianness of most Indians.
So I took a lot of help from Shankrant's Sanu's book, the English language, English medium myth, I think it's called. And it's evident. I mean, you were saying that we think in our language and write in English. Actually, we think in English. That is the worst damage that has been done to us, because people like us who have studied in maybe your upbringing was different, but those who have studied in English medium schools all their lives would be thinking in English, and then they would be translating it into their their mother tongue, which they would have been speaking in at home. But then slowly, even that more and more English words get introduced in it. So yeah, I mean, the whole destruction that I've talked about in my book, Destruction of Knowledge, has a lot of references to language. So when our own mother tongues were relegated to this position of second language and third language, and English becomes the first language, so you can imagine what happens. And so our heroes are now the heroes, those who are heroes for the European world, for the Western world. So we will be quoting from Shakespeare, we'll be quoting from Benjamin Franklin and so on. But we don't know that more profound things have been said in our own culture by our own writers, authors, philosophers, and it's just very painful. So I've made that connection, that we have to recognize that unless we go back to our languages, we will not find the path, we'll not find our way back to our own history, our culture, and our civilization. So, and it's evident. Like when I started learning Sanskrit, I don't know if I'm going to be a lifelong learner, I guess, because it has been slow, because we think in English, and our teacher constantly has to tell us, do not translate this into English. Just look at the word and then figure out the meaning, but do not translate it into English. And it's a hard exercise, because we have read so many books in English, we automatically start thinking, oh, does this word mean this in English? But you shouldn't be making those. You have to first understand what that word is in that language, in Sanskrit. And then at the end of it all, think about what that word could be in English. We shouldn't, because the moment we convert it into English, then the meaning is lost, because it means that word in Sanskrit means so many things. And once you convert it into English, it just means that one or two. It has just one or two meanings to it. So I've talked about it, that not just the medium of instruction in the primary schools, which is, of course, the NEP, the new education policy in India, is already talking about it, that until grade 6, that children should be taught in their own languages. So that will be done, I'm sure. But what about higher education? Today, engineering, the engineering, law, all these, the higher education is being imparted in English. So can we think of engineering in Hindi, Kannada, Tamil, and whatever is your mother tongue? Because there are a lot of benefits to this. Those who are able to, those who come from the villages, from the rural areas, They don't know much English, and when they have to suddenly join engineering colleges in English, which are where they're being taught in English, they don't understand, and it takes a long time. And I personally know, like even in Karnataka, there are some very good students who are from the interiors, and when they come to when they try to get into engineering colleges, then the books are all in English, and they are not able to understand. So, can we have even professional courses? Can we have this option of teaching them in the mother tongues? At least use some options where those some students can go and study in those kind of colleges where engineering is being taught in the mother tongue or any other higher education discipline. That is something I've brought out in my book. But the funny thing is, a lot of people oppose this. Our own Indians, our own people, they oppose this because they say, no, English is the international medium, and if you don't learn in English, you will not be able to connect with the world. But that's very strange because if you look at China, if you look at Germany, Japan, they're all learning in their own mother tongues. They are studying engineering in their own mother tongues. They're doing programming in their own language. So, I mean, they're learning programming in their own language. Maybe when they write it out, the program it will be in the international language. But when they learn programming, everything, they learn it in their own mother tongues, and they are better than us. The Russian programmers, the Chinese programmers, they are supposed to be even better than the Indian programmers, right? They are available in big numbers, whereas we are still struggling. So in that sense, I have brought out that language is very important. It helps in cognition. So when we first start learning, and if suppose we want good cognitive outcomes, it helps to study in your own mother tongue. I myself remember the conflict I had, as a Kannada speaking person. Kannada is my mother tongue. And when I grew up in Delhi, I remember the first few years, it was a bit difficult because the teachers would be speaking in English to me. And at home, I would be speaking in Kannada. And of course, we get over that. And then we learn the languages because children can learn so much. But the damage that is done when we don't learn in our own mother tongue is that we lose the connection to our mother in a way. We just lose the connection. So we do not understand the meanings of so many things that we do, so many customs that we have, why we are doing it. If you had been educated in your own language, you would have known why you're doing customs in a certain way, why you don't blow out, why you should not be blowing out a candle on your birthday. That becomes very apparent. We know that in our culture, we always light lamps when we inaugurate something. So lighting lamps, spreading light, that is the way we do things. And now instead of that, on our birthdays, we all blow out candles because we think that's the way it should be done. There are so many who are not even aware that this is so ashubh that you're blowing out a candle on your birthday when you celebrate your birthday. And there are millions of such things that you understand when you know your own culture and civilization, if you know your own language very well. And Sanskrit, we need to very quickly embrace Sanskrit. And it's not hard at all. So many people who have studied Sanskrit through the primary level say that it's so easy. And then we need to find maybe the technical terms. For engineering terms, we need to have all those things in Sanskrit. And once they become a norm, it's not going to be hard to switch over. So I would recommend Shankran Sanu's book in that regard. And I also have a portion in my book talking about it.
No, good points actually, because like you said, the thought process is controlled by your language, and also you also said some of the confused desis in USA, and I've been to many Rana conventions. I think probably you are part of that, and I've seen how confused people are about their culture. They'll put on a pagadi, but they'll have no respect they will say that it loses our competitiveness. Actually, it increases your competitiveness because you are thinking in a different way than your competitor. And look at Japan, look at China.
Yes. And today we have technology that everything can be translated very quickly. So I have heard that when Chinese papers are published, a paper is published in Chinese, within 24 to 48 hours, it can actually be available in English, the translation. I don't know how good that translation is. The translation technology itself is getting better and better now. So, I mean, we should be thinking in that direction that, maybe we just study in our mother tongue, converse in our mother tongue, and improve and use technology to the hilt. So when I went to Russia, for example, I was speaking English, and he was putting the cell phone close to me, and then it was playing back to him in Russian, whatever I was saying in English, and he was replying to me, and then I would hear the recording and speak to him. So we had a conversation, though we were speaking in different languages, simply because of technology. So I think we should also think about that and not really worry about, oh, how we will have a problem internationally if we switch to our mother tongue. I don't think so. We've got to factor in technology and find ways in which we can be very close to our mother tongues, our languages, and still be connected to the world using technology.
The even the Muslim conquest of India, which was Ajami Islam from Persia, conquered India, and they introduced Farsi as the official language, not
Mhm.
not Arabic, Farsi, because the
Correct.
Arabic was stopped. Muhammad Iqlaq, Muhammad, all those people were stopped at Sindh.
Mhm.
Uh, Raja Dahir had stopped
Yes.
them. So it was a
Mhm.
Persian. Farsi became the official language, which is
Yes.
coming from Iran that time. Now,
Mhm.
anyway, now it is being more taught in India than in even in Iran. So the coming back to after the language comes the temples.
Mhm.
Now the temples as a source of economics. We have done a big show with Sandeep Singh on our show. He has written a book on temple economics, and where the temples played an important role in economy. And the recent example is Kashi, where the corridor has actually created new economic impetus to Varanasi. The second one is Ayodhya. Now, Ayodhya is becoming a
Mhm.
tourist hotspot in Uttar Pradesh because of the
Mhm.
temple based economy. The third is
Mhm.
Udupi. Now, Udupi, a lot of hijab controversy is going on, which really destroys the original culture of the temple town, Madhvacharya's town.
Mhm.
And also Rangapatnam, which is Sri Rangapatnam, which is a temple economy. So
Mhm.
temples have played a major role, and last to forget is Jagannath Puri Temple, which
Mhm.
feeds 25,000 people a day. No church in the world does that.
Mhm.
No Islamic mosque does that. This is a 25,000 going on for hundreds of thousands of years, not just
Mhm.
today. So, how does the temple play in the economy and also in education and also protecting the culture of the people?
Yes. I mean, as I said, temples were centers of learning, right? So people would go to the temple, they would pray, they would have a connection with the deity, but they would also be aware of the famous scholars who are in town, who would be staying in a place close to the temple or in the temple itself, wherever the arrangements were there. For example, mathas. I have written a lot. I've written a portion about mathas in ancient times, which are there today also, but they don't perform exactly the same role. So the temples, mathas. So mathas were places where uh, people, the travelers, could stay when they are traveling. They could stay there, and the classes are also going on there. And there's a library also there, so travelers can read something that they want in the library, and they can also join any class that they want and listen in what's happening in the class. And so imagine another aspect to the temple economy, these kind of mathas, which give you a complete overall holistic education, and at the same time there are it gives shelter to travelers who are coming in there and staying there, and that's the first go-to place. So when they would people would go to a new place, they would look for a matha, where they can stay. And uh, and they were also places where doctors were available. So a matha is where even medical services are available. So if you're and it's interesting that there is evidence that there were veterinary doctors as well. I mentioned that in my book. So they're traveling with animals. An animal which is tired, injured, needs treatment. Even that you can get that in a matha. So yes, temple economy, which is, and I mean, catering to everything, every need of the people. So it was food, as you mentioned, education, health services, uh, library services. Imagine, so you can actually sit there and read. So these we know, of course, from the inscriptions that are in different places, and in South India, especially, lots of inscriptions telling who donated to these temples or mathas, and who built these, and what are the subjects that are being taught there, how many students are studying over there. All those things are mentioned. So so the thing is that when all this was destroyed, this whole thing was destroyed. This whole uh, multifunctional temple was destroyed, and then these now people are clueless, and then they're now at the mercy of all the these commercial forces which do not have dharma attached to them. That's what happened when the temple economy was destroyed. So centers of art, learning, full, the holistic education, all gone. And now, we are scattered. So we have an education system where these things are not even, they can't even imagine these things, right? It's all very, very narrow. The subjects are taught in a very narrow way. There's no dharmic framework. So that's what has happened when we destroyed the temple economies. We destroyed a whole lot of things along with the deity itself.
Actually, parampara system protected Hindus from colonialism.
Correct.
And that's what the temples did. And the first leg was to destroy the faith of the Hindu society in Brahmanas, who are the poorest people. Generally, financially, they're the poorest people. So if people do not believe in Brahman, and that's how the Bollywood played a very important role in making them comedy characters. And people love those Bollywood heroes who make fun of the pandits and pujaris.
Absolutely tragic. Brahmanas, who are the custodians of knowledge, and then we are making fun of them. It's absolutely tragic.
And they are the first ones targeted by all the colonial powers. Targeted by Islam. Either you bribe them to become part of you, or make them part of your cabinet, give them more money, and create a differentiation. And also the word caste is a European word. It has nothing to do with India. And to put a guilty consciousness in Hindus that your religion is inferior because it introduces caste system. Now, how does the destruction of Brahman affected in the rise of imperialism in India? Did you capture that anytime in any of?
Of course, when we talk about the colonial period, right? So now when the village schools are now being deprived of funding, so that where there was an ecosystem, like G.W. Leitner in his book has described what happened in Punjab, where he says that even the poorest of people, even the criminals, they wanted to donate to schools. They wanted to donate to the gurus and the pathshalas, because that's the way you achieve, you acquired merit in a society, that you have done so much dana to an educational institution. So in that kind of a ecosystem came this colonialism, and then the English Education Act. And then all these kind of schools were closed, which were teaching in Indian languages, in Punjabi, in Sindhi, and then came these Indian English language schools. And so that is when all this was destroyed, right? This giving to the schools. And then in its place came all these kind of, these kind of schools where they are only interested in brainwashing them. And then Brahmanas, it's mentioned in Dharampal's work, that in the English themselves, in some of the civil servants, when they gave reports about the functioning of the current schools of the time, that Brahman teachers are very dedicated. And even though we are taking away the funds from them, we are depriving them of funding. The Brahmanas are still turning up to teach in the school. And even on an empty stomach, they are teaching. I mean, when you read this, it's so painful. You realize how much the Brahmanas have done, what an important role they have played in teaching, because they know it's their dharma. It's wrong to keep education and knowledge with you and not teach it. So that was the thing. I have also captured how when the civil services grew, the British run civil services in India, then they started recruiting. There were not enough British people to become civil servants. They started recruiting from Indians. And obviously the Brahmanas were the ones who were recruited, because they were able to learn English very quickly and pass the civil services exam. So now those Brahmanas who were earlier teachers, who were earlier maybe priests in temples, now suddenly they are becoming civil servants. So you see, the whole society got altered. So now Brahmanas became civil servants, and now they became tax collectors. So then that is how this whole Dravidian hate for Brahmins has actually been traced to this, the Brahmanas being inducted into civil services by the British, and how that put them into conflict positions with the locals, because now they are the ones who are fleecing the locals and getting the taxes out of them. And so that started fueling the the hatred, the anger towards the Brahmanas, when actually that was not the way Indian society was. Brahmanas were not supposed to do this kind of thing, and there wasn't this kind of exploitative taxation. So this is how the role of the Brahmanas got more and more denigrated, uh, economically also, and then in a targeted way. The British went about deepening whatever divisions that they could see and telling them that yes, Brahmanas are responsible for this, they are doing this. And a lot of it was driven by missionaries, Christian missionaries. I have mentioned that in my book. So the Christian missionaries had an agenda there that by making the Brahmanas the bad guys, they can actually tell the people to convert to Christianity, because then there are no Brahmanas in the Christianity. Everybody is equal, and our God loves you and things like that. So the lot of anti-Brahmin literature that you find written in Tamil and various other languages has actually come from the Christian missionaries.
The uh, the the another aspect was the introduction of the segregation of between Dalit and Shudra and Brahmana superior. Now, Indian literature doesn't talk about that. Indian literature just says all are equal. Because of them, society becomes stable. Because there is no such thing as Shudra is inferior, because they are the middle class, totally. What do you call it? Middle class. And the Vaishya, they are the upper middle class, because they are the ones who create businesses. In today's parlance, if you say, artisans, engineers, doctors were all considered part of the service society, which is Shudra category.
Correct.
Today those are considered very, so they were equally important during that time also. Which society can function without engineer?
The whole society had these interdependent units. So
Exactly.
everybody recognizes that, okay, he's doing this work, I depend on him for this work. And then the so-called Shudra would know that, okay, this Brahman, I respect him for the knowledge he's giving. So there was respect, mutual respect. That withered away when we got exploited, taxed to the point that we can't even think. I mean, imagine in some places 50% taxation was imposed. So how can the mind and body be together when you're so poor? That's what happened.
And people do not know that the Artha Shastra recommends maximum 25% taxes, and that too on expendable income, not on the basic livelihood of a person. And so even there we are going off track. Now the coming to the laws now, like 1901, the caste system was instituted. 1910, approximately 1910, is where the Indian education system policy by the British was introduced. And also 1901 itself, the temples were taken into government control. Only Hindu temples, because they wanted Christianity and Islam to spread in India. But till date, no such laws have been changed till date. And Hindus are still struggling, because people do not know that Tirupati temple feeds more Muslims than Hindus today. And just an example, that all the money is used by the taxes. And if you look at the laws in the taxes, majority of the money goes to the madrasas, from the Hindu temples to madrasas. It has not happened in the reverse way, where the madrasas fund the Hindu temples. But it's only one-way street till date. So what do you think after writing this book? What will be your advice to people?
Now, of course, temple control absolutely has to be in the hands of the Hindus. And this is complete nonsense that the money that is being donated to temples is being used for purposes that are inimical to our own religion, our culture, our civilization. That should absolutely be stopped. And in fact, I have been to so many temples where I've spoken to the priests, and during the conversations with them, I've realized that their children don't want to become priests, because they realize that there's no, they can't subsist on it. And you get far more respect by becoming engineers and doctors rather than being an archaka of a temple. So I can see the tears in the eyes of these people. And that's very sad. So when we give to a temple, we want that temple to be, the money to be used for maintaining the temple, and for the good of the people who are working over there, taking care of the temple, and for the good of the society. That's why we give the money to the temple. That's why we put money in the hundi. And it's not that we are not putting it there for going and helping those very forces that are destroying us. So yes, I'm totally for freeing the temples from the governmental control and putting them back in the hands of Hindus. And of course, it should be respectable and I mean, Hindus who are entrusted with this job should do it in a sincere way. I mean, we should not have scams over there. There should be some safeguards so that there are no scams and the money is used properly for the Hindus. That's what I would call for.
See, the thing is, the scams are very common in the church. Vatican is a great example. Scams are very common in the madrasas, very common. That's a human thing. That's a criminal activity is everywhere. And one of the things which comes to the mind is that if they are properly trained people, then they will naturally go away from these kind of activities. Now, the last question in this series is, and you can again show your book also, the education system. When you talk about the education system and the new education policy, now what are the things in the new education policy which you feel are problematic and still continuing the colonial legacy?
Well, actually, when I look at the NEP, so I have just so you asked me to hold the book again. Here it is. I think my connection is not too stable. I hope you're hearing me properly.
I can hear you.
This is the book. And in the last chapter where I talk about the way forward, I have mentioned the NEP. The NEP is a policy document and it's very good. It says all the right things. So it says that, you should bring back the ancient knowledge. You should have focus on skills. You should connect with the artisans, and the children should get exposure to the crafts, to the vocations, all that is mentioned. Flexibility, so that if you drop out from the education system and you join in later, you should be able to do it smoothly. All those things are there. Maybe where I'm a little bit concerned is where foreign universities are being invited. Foreign universities are being invited for collaborations to India. And I think we need to be a little careful there. So especially if it deals with humanities subjects. So if you're talking about sociology or anthropology and, you're calling these US universities, European universities, there I'm a little bit concerned because we have seen the kind of papers that they write about Indian culture, customs, the Kumbh Mela, everything, how they interpret these things. So where we are inviting these universities to come and collaborate or even set up shop in India, I would raise a red flag there that you have to be careful. And but otherwise, there's no real problem with anything in the NEP. It's just about how are they going to implement it. They all sound very good, but how are you going to implement it? So that's the only problem. The devil is going to be in the details in the implementation of the NEP to ensure that it really is going to achieve what the policy document says it will.
The American education system is filled with humanities nowadays, wokeism, cancel culture, and how to go everything against the American state first, and then go after any other state which is affiliated to them. Correct. It's like inviting pandemic into India. Now, and they are filled with Chinese money, so it's all the Chinese mindset and all those things come into India. Now, you correctly said that the inviting American universities is like inviting all these things, all diseases, which are
especially humanities. I'm all for collaboration for in science and maybe astronomy and all these mathematics. Yes, go ahead. But with humanities, be a little careful.
Yes, and also the history lessons. Otherwise, you'll create many Jawaharlal Nehrus in India, right?
No. We don't want another Nehru, please.
Yes. He was the one prime minister who was the prime minister of India, and he was doing Bharat Ek Khoj. Only his only prime minister was still searching, and his entire Khandan is also searching India.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you so much, Sahana Singh ji. Yeah, you're saying something. Go ahead. Last words.
I was talking about the same thing. So there has been a lot of damage. We have been independent for so many years, and we have actually just continued with the colonial rule. So the true independence still has to come. We are still in the struggling with colonialism. So that's what I was hoping that this book is able to make a dent in that respect, to bring in decolonization, decoloniality.
That's a great point. And also decoloniality is required right now. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the CNN news, if anyone likes Brian Stelter and other people, then you know what is wrong with the American education system. And it is a very highly condescending attitude that whatever I have said is the last word. And if you do something against that, I'm surprised. I'm shocked. Oh, what happened? So anyway, so Indians need to be beware of that, and also the people who are the creating the NEP needs to also know that. Thank you so much, Sahana Singh ji, for coming on the show. And viewers, if you like her, you have seen her 2 times the book, and I'll also put in the link also. Do get that book and read it and find out more. And also she also mentions Sankrant Sanu. So he's a good friend of mine. You can try his book on the English and many articles he has written. Check it out on Google. So thank you so much for joining, and thank you all the viewers. Do comment on the video. That's very important for us. Namaste.
Namaste.